Thank you for receiving me with so much affection. Thank you very much. Absolutely, we are going to make Argentina and America great again. And do not be intimidated by some local results.
Y no se dejen intimidar por algunos resultados locales.
First of all, I want to thank the organizers of the American Business Forum, and especially its president, Francis Sirres, for the invitation. It is an honor to be here surrounded by such remarkable figures as President Trump, a friend both personal and of the Argentine Republic. I am also happy to be able to share the stage with one of our most illustrious athletes and pride of all Argentines, Lionel Messi, a man who took Argentine talent to the highest level in the world. A living proof that effort, dedication and passion are capable of generating miracles. And a proof that sometimes I can also congratulate a deaf person. I want to take advantage of this form of businessmen, leaders, athletes and thinkers to return to a question that informs all our management in Argentina. For too long we have been used to hearing from politicians and intellectuals that capitalism was a kind of unnecessary evil with which we have to live in our societies. Of course, there are also those who openly fight communism and the planned economy. But they are also the ones who fight against capitalism. But the position that I refer to is much more widespread in the West. I am talking about the free market criticism to justify the state intervention. This is more normal and popular. It has gained hundreds of legitimate elections over the last century in the American and European continent, and that is why it is even more harmful. In order not to bore you, I'm going to summarize an argument. They grant that capitalism is the only way we can enjoy economic growth, but they maintain that this growth impacts in a very unequal way in society, and also teacher its own dynamics tends to be distorted. That is why, according to them, we need to understand that capitalism tends to be distorted. That is why, according to them, we would need the state to intervene actively in the market. The state, according to them, should intervene there to ensure equality among citizens and prevent monopolies or market failures. The free market, according to them, is not optimal to guarantee growth and ends up preventing general well-being to favor a few, to the detriment of the great majority. The argument establishes that social justice needs to grow, and the state has to have an active role in economic life to ensure it. According to this vision, all the seeds of growth are worth nothing without the state redistributing them. In other words, capitalism is only a necessary evil that always has to be tied to state beneficence. I believe that all of us here know where these widespread ideas lead to. By relying on them, the state expends more and more year after year, getting involved not only in its own economic activities, but also in the lives of individuals until there is nothing left outside of it. There always arises a new justification for public officials to extend their insociable clause on civil society under the excuse of enlarging a nation and doing good for its citizens. The state nudges as if it meant the same thing. And this happens until we reach the same destination as those who have at least the intellectual honesty to say that they hate capitalism, the total control of the state over the economy and the lives of people. That is communism. Let's take the example of Cuba, where Fidel Castro continued to promise social justice, democracy and a planned economy, and died after more than 50 years of dictatorial government, avoiding communism or death. For too long, a pro-capitalist response to this challenge of the state was to claim the economic miracle that capitalism meant to the world of free enterprise. Because it is true, the data do not lie and they are on our side. In other words, thanks to the market economy, an innumerable number of people came out of extreme poverty and made possible an innumerable number of technological and scientific wonders. But this is not enough, because a moral argument can never be answered with a factual argument. In fact, it cannot continue to suggest the right to be. It can never conclude the right to be. And that is why this leftist argument has won in the fight for ideas. That is why in the West we are getting closer and closer to that communism that we used to look at with horror from the other side of the Iron Curtain. That is why, if we concede that capitalism is a necessary evil, we will have already lost it. Although we win momentarily, sooner or later they will return, because they will continue to be the owners of the rod that determines good and evil. And they will say that it is fair and that it is not. We cannot make then a mistake again. That is why today I come to tell you that capitalism is not bad at all, but that it is the way that true justice takes in this world, because it is the natural consequence of a dignity and freedom of man, to which the fruit of his work belongs. In this life we do not have many natural rights, beyond the right to earn the sweat of our forehead, which is nothing more than the right to earn and freely dispose of our time of life, either to use it for ourselves or sell it to others as a workforce. That is what makes us all free men and differentiates us from slaves. A nefarious institution abolished precisely by free societies before any other. This freedom is derived from the property rights and the discretion to dispose of it within the margins of the common law. Investment, saving and consumption are only phenomena that emerge from this simple truth. I warn you that the rent controls are an attack on property rights. Hence, the system of prices affects the functioning of the system and ends up destroying everything in its path. When the state and intellectuals give this natural right the name of capitalism to vilify and justify the intervention of the state, they are not only destroying growth to find their supposed economic optimism, but they are also violating the most basic of natural rights. When the state turns so violently against the rights of individuals, it does nothing but reduce them to slaves. That is, they start a war against them. Capitalism and property rights are not unnecessary evils. They are not evils. They are the undisputed basis of our civilization, and it is our sacred mission to restore them as a fundamental stone of our societies. That is, we do not believe that capitalism is morally correct. The fact of removing more than 90% of the global population from poverty, but that it managed to remove them from poverty precisely because it is the most moral model of all existent. In this sense, I want to quote a book by one of the most important Austrian economists in history. He was a professor at the University of New York. His name is Israel Kirzner. He has a book called Creativity, Capitalism and Distributive Justice. The question that is asked is that it is undisputed the productive superiority of capitalism versus socialism. This is so obvious that even the socialists cannot question it. But the capitalist system is labeled as unfair. It is questioned because it distributes the results unevenly. And what Israel Kirzner does is to say the following. If the system is immoral, it is unfair and it is wrong with ethically. No matter how productive it is not worth defending it. And that topic is taken very seriously on basis of two fundamental ideas. The principle of appropriation of Locke, that is, the one who creates something owns it, and with the idea of Hayek, the market as a process of discovery. Israel-Culture proves not only that capitalism is moral. Israel-Culture proves not only that the capitalist system is the only one that can be efficient, but at the same time proves that it is the only fair system, and that hurts the socialists. Our system is not only more productive, but it is the only one that is moral, unlike the murderous system. Therefore, without capitalism, we will be condemned to the miseries of planned societies. Which are nothing more than slave societies with much better marketing. What they call the present state, or in English the welfare state, is nothing more than the phrase they say to hide that in the end, their path is the path of servitude. Here I also want to make mention of a very important work by one of the most important anarcho-capitalist economists in the world, Professor Jesús Huerta Soto, in a work called The Theory of Dynamic Efficiency. And in that work, what he seeks is to determine what the optimal path of growth is. And after making some inquisitions about different aspects of the economic theory, what he points out is very strong, because he says that nothing that is unfair can be efficient. In other words, at the height of the wall efficiency with which we economists work, there should not be any place on something that is unfair. And at the same time, he points out that everything that is efficient also has to be inexorably fair. That is rooted in what are our Western values. And that is rooted in what are our Western values. And that is rooted in what are our Western values. And that is rooted in what are our Western values. The Western values, which are the Judeo-Christian values. And moreover, as an example, when I have cabinet meetings, there's always a role. Always the ethical and moral values are above what political utilitarianism dictates. There are no concessions to doing what is right, and when you do what is fair and ethically correct, the country will prosper. In this sense, know that my mission in Argentina is nothing more than to return to this common sense, forgotten by an incandescent political class of power, accustomed to attributing and appropriating the achievements in the efforts of its free citizens, going strictly to what Argentina is. As everyone well knows, my party comes from a historic victory in the legislative elections. We did everything that classical politics said we should not do. And the only thing that guided us in the decision-making process was what is ethical and moral. And the Argentines responded strongly with a great triumph in the election. We won a lot of votes. We won a lot of votes at the national level, and we even reached a difference of more than 14 points in the province of Buenos Aires, which contains a third of the population of the country. These were very hard months for the Argentines, where because of the economic blow that the opposition tried to carry out from the Congress, the country's economy was slowed down, generating uncertainty and discomfort in citizens. As a result, I spent the last few months traveling all over the country to ask the Argentines not to give up, to promise them that this time the effort would be worth it. And this promise was not in vain. It is not a promise that I take lightly. It is a sacred pact with the people that has paved the way for this government and has given us the tools to carry out the reforms that the country urgently needs. For all this, I consider it relevant once again to thank the confidence of the Argentine people, confidence without which none of this would be possible. But why do we say that this time the effort is worth it? Because what was at stake in this election was truly gigantic. These elections were a plebiscite between two models of the country, the model of freedom and capitalism, with the tax order as the main battle horse, or the model of servitude, which we describe as its glide, the deficits, the monetary mission, the debt, and obviously the impoverishment. As I mentioned before, for months we have been receiving systematic bombings from the Congress. Almost all the country's economists insisted, in the midst of a legislative attack on a tax increase, that our economic program was finished, and they clung to the evolution of the price of assets and the rise of the country's risk to base it. We, on the other hand, said that the tax program and change were solid because the budget surplus is not negotiable, because we stopped issuing money more than a year ago, and because the central bank have been revitalized for the first time in many years. And once the political noise has been cleared, what happened? The Argentine market had its greatest subhistoric rise in a day, its greatest subhistoric rise in a week, and it continues to rise, despite the fact that, in addition, it lowered the country's risk by more than 400 points. In short, the exact opposite of that infamous August 12, 2019, in which we portray one of the greatest stock market declines in the history of the world because of the mere possibility that capitalism would return to power. That said, by the way, it is neither more nor less than one of the sources of socialism of the 21st century, and that somewhere on the East Coast it has entered. Here. They disguise themselves as lambs, and they are worse than the worst of the wolf surpasses. If there is something that has been clear, with us it is the reality of what we call, in short, the Kuka Risk, that is, the Kirzner risk, or the risk of socialism. We were able to see in numbers the magnitude of the political risk that our economic program always had to deal with. And this is so because we have, in Argentina, a sector of destruction and foreign policy, the basic principles of the economy and common good, that is made presence but a base of the highest risk for the whole country. And now that they are further away than ever from returning to power, we can clear that fear. Historically, most of the successful stabilization plans in the world have political consensus. What happened in Argentina was something unprecedented. We carried out a plan of successful stabilization with social consensus. Yes, but without political consensus. But the destabilizing clashes were deeply harmful to society. As you well know, the political risk does not only affect the finances of the state, but the credits of the entire economy. The Kirzner madness makes all companies pay more for financing, that they employ fewer people, that they make fewer works, and that they can sell less on credit. The Kirzner madness makes mortgage loans more expensive and the credit card financing rates more expensive. Faced with this panorama, many wanted us to solve a structural risk problem with monetary policy. They wanted us to inject money to solve the trust problem and the fall in the demand for money. In economic terms, they wanted to solve the fall in demand by increasing the supply. In everyday terms, they were asking us to start a fire by adding more gasoline, for understanding that this would only have aggravated the problem. We had the monetary scheme. Going back to the point, we coexist with a part of the political system that rejects doing what Argentina needs, and that opposition. We have just strongly defeated the Kirzner, and that is what matters. Argentina finally said no to this madness. It has cost us so much. Over time, Argentina has taken a crucial step on the path of freedom. A step that is a good measure, is irreversible. Now, as a country, we have to compensate for lost time. We have reached decades of failure compared to the rest, other countries of the region, and even more of the world, for the amount of goods and services of high demand that we can produce. We have to say that the convergence of Argentine wealth towards the levels of the rest of the developed world will be phenomenal. We are entering the path in which we will make Argentina great again. This is associated with a paradigm shift that took place in Argentina in recent years. We are meeting again with the faith that property rights and free exercise are the same within the margins of the law. They are the only way to achieve prosperity, and we need to make this change so that every day fewer people suffer because of poverty, so that every day more people can pursue their dreams, be it having a house in which to raise their family, be it having a car that they always wanted, or be it being able to start a business. Because the change is to bring back freedom and responsibility for all our citizens. This is the country of freedom, of which we dream, and it is a country to which we are committed, and we are getting closer and closer to achieving a country that rises like a lighthouse out of a dominant West, by the honey of the present state, by the false arguments of those who see capitalism as a necessary evil, and by those who fight for a present state that only brings the illusion of well-being today at the cost of destroying the well-being of tomorrow, as has been demonstrated in Argentina. And I want to repeat it again so that it is very clear. A present state that only brings the illusion of today's well-being at the cost of destroying tomorrow's well-being, as has been demonstrated in Argentina. And we are the ones who can achieve this change and promote it, because we are heralds of a dystopian future, because we live the future that sooner or later will come to the countries that are also transiting this path of state absurdity, embracing the nefarious ideas of the 21st century socialism, or better known in these lands as the woke. The woke. We already live as decades of statism left Argentina, a country destined to greatness in ruins. And today we have the duty and the challenge of rebuilding it. Today we have the duty and the challenge of setting the foundations for a better future. And the fundamental thing is that 2 out of every 3 Argentines, as I said on the 27th of October, when they received the results, 2 out of every 3 Argentines don't want to go back to the past. They don't want socialism anymore. In the 21st century, they have already realized the lie. With local nuances and preferences, 2 out of every 3 Argentines want some version of capitalism. That is the window of opportunities that we all have today. We have the vocation to align all the pro-capitalist actors of the country, which represent at least two-thirds of our society. It is time to build a great capitalist consensus in Argentina, and this great coalition of growth meets with a nation in which everything can be done, a country that has been decapitated by irresponsible dirigism that favored consumption over investment. This is so that today, 70% of imports in Argentina correspond to capital and productive inputs. The private sector already knows what it has to do. It knows the opportunities and understands that the time to take advantage of it is now. The result of the capitalization that we are just beginning to see will continue to grow over the years. Argentina will exploit resources and will make the developed industries grow. To give you some examples, we have practically the same amount of herd and cattle as 30 years ago, a madness for a country famous for the quality of its meat. In line with us, I would like to thank President Donald Trump and all his administration for having reached an agreement for Argentina's meat quota, 4 times higher than the previous one. This is nothing more than one of the trade agreements that Argentina and the United States have been G for many years, and that between both countries we are working to rectify, to continue deepening the idea. Argentina does not export a granite copper when Chile, which shares border with us, exports $20,000 million a year. In the same way, we are on the path with oil and gas, at the income of between $30,000 and $40,000 million annually from here to Spain in 2031. We have an intangible sector that today represents less than 3% of our exports, with a huge projection and investment capacity, and the same can be said of practically any sector. The infrastructure of tourism, factories, grains, or the knowledge industry. We have geographical diversity that allows practically any human being on the planet that wants to invest in Argentina to exploit their knowledge in a useful way to export their talents to the rest of the planet. Now, thanks to the normalization of our macroeconomics and the correct functioning of the large investment regime, we have economic and political opportunities to do so. And thus is added for the first time that we have the correct incentives to do so. Not for nothing, we have already had announcements for more than $100,000 million in the last year, of which more than 50,000 are already in different approvals. That is why we must continue to move forward on this path. Know that from December, we will be the most reformist in the history of Argentina. And this not only because our space already has the fund necessary to sustain our decrees and goals, but also because along with the rest of the economically rational members of the Congress, which luckily are more and more, we will build the political majority that is needed to approve the reforms that Argentina needs. In this sense, we are talking about a work modernization to update the conditions under which employment is generated in Argentina, accommodating them to international standards in order to increase the number of workers belonging to the formal system. We are talking about deepening the path of deregulation and the reduction of taxes in order to continue to reduce the great Argentine costs, so that more and more companies can be profitable in Argentina, strengthening our productive capacity and expected levels. We are talking about reforming criminal laws so that crime can be prosecuted and punished, because there is no economic growth without the defense of life property, which is nothing but the fruit of the work of each one of us. In Argentina, the one who deserves pays for it. In Argentina, there is no minimum amount of theft that is forgiven. They are condemned to all crimes. Without going any further, many will remember the story of Sodoma. Sodoma was a city where it was allowed to be stolen, and that's how it ended. It ended up destroyed. In this sense, we are talking about reforming criminal laws so that crime can be prosecuted and punished, because there is no economic growth without the defense of life and property, as I said earlier. These reforms will allow us to take this path on stone and will allow all Argentines to grow up with the certainty that hard work and effort are worth it, that the quality of life improves year by year, that their children will have a life that they could not even imagine, because, after all, Argentina in the future, with all its well-earnedness, is unimaginable for any of us. In this sense, I want to invite you to be part of the future that we are building. I want to invite you to invest in this country and demonstrate the power and moral superiority of capitalism, to be part of the redemption that the Argentine people need, and that will serve as an example for the rest of the world. For all this, I want to thank you for listening to me. May God bless America. May the forces of heaven be with us. And long life freedom, damn it. 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 Make America great again.